This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for heart. Oh no, it is time for
care notes.
Oh my care note. Oh my gosh. You know, Doug, this
You do
is
too
bad.
many broadcasts.
Yeah, I do. And all of them are coming off my tongue right now. And so I have to apologize to our listeners because Doug Wilber and I were talking about Care Notes and Cherished Companions, the company that he has here in Northeast Ohio. And I am so dedicated to the care of elderly people. And I am slowly crawling up that ladder myself, or climbing down it. I'm not sure which way, but I really like our discussions because when I walk away, I feel just a little more educated on what I might be going through, but what my family members are going through and my neighbors, because
Right.
sometimes we just are a little bit blind to that. We walk around with those blinders on and think that everybody is still, 20 years old, and we're not.
Right. Well, it's interesting because a lot of people, some of our best caregivers, I'll go a different angle. Some of our very, very best people that do care are older. And because when you start experiencing some of the of life's challenges, whether it be where you physically have gone through surgery, or you are having arthritis, or you're having different things that are hitting you, it gives you a certain sense and empathy that you wouldn't have otherwise. But it also, you're beginning to experience those things like you mentioned, and I think that ends up, giving you a very, very different perspective
Absolutely.
on things, because you're seeing it. Or you had a parent that experienced it or something like that. So one of the things that today I'd like to spend time talking about some of the common issues in the elderly, and specifically, health issues that people deal with.
Sure.
And I think that, that if you, to your point, if you're aware of those things, you end up being aware enough that you may start, having compassion and reaching out, or understanding a little bit of the pain or the discomfort that people have.
Right.
And I think that might also play into, helping to meet some of those needs in a better way, if you're understanding what's
Sure.
going on. So, first thing is just chronic health issues. There's a lot of chronic conditions that that people have. As a matter of fact, in the United States, at least, 92% of elderly people have at least one chronic condition.
Wow.
And 77% have at least two chronic conditions, simultaneous conditions. So things like, a stroke, or heart disease, or cancer, blood pressure, diabetes, these chronic issues mean a lot of things. It means you're taking medicines. It means, or in most cases, it may mean that you're having aches and pains that you otherwise might not be having, and there are costs associated with having to purchase medicines, and there are also side effects that are oftentimes tied in with that as
Sure.
well. And so those chronic conditions are a pretty important thing to know, that first of all, either people are getting treatment, or they should be getting treatment. And it can have a multiplying effect with that. And, one of the other things that happens too is you take multiple medicines and you're likely to have more interactions and other things. Strangely, it's not uncommon if you talk to anyone who's been in hospice that they'll take someone off of their medicines in hospice. Usually it's not all medicines, but they may take them off on a lot of them. And some people actually perk up, they actually do better.
Right.
And that's because there were, I think, there were so many interactive developments that happen from having multiple pills that, all of a sudden it was doing more harm than good. And,
Right.
and now I want to be clear, you don't do that on your own.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
That is not a good thing. So one of the other things that I think is common with older people are, their mental health. At some point in time, if you live long enough, you're going to outlive most of your friends.
Right.
And you will oftentimes outlive a spouse, and, children, other things. So it is very, very common to deal with depression with people who are older. And just because someone's older doesn't mean they're ready to die.
Exactly.
Or prepared for that. Frankly, in many ways, being prepared to die is oftentimes, or for death, I guess, not to die immediately, but is oftentimes because that preparation for it is a lifetime preparation, that you've thought through things and you've worked through things, and I think faith plays a part in many people's lives, and being able to kind of see a bigger perspective.
Sure.
And that, that this isn't the end, that, there's more than just this life. And, but just the grief of losing friends, losing spouses, family members, is tremendous. I mean, and so we are constantly seeing people that are dealing with depression. And depression, there's obviously two types of depression. There's depression that is, you should normally go through some depression if a close family member dies. That's not abnormal. That's a normal thing. Where I think depression can take a different thing, or a different angle, is when you're not kind of coming out of it. You're not snapping out of it.
Right.
Not that anyone really does. And you just have this depression that keeps on going. And that type of depression especially requires, I think, treatments in order to break that cycle. So you're not constantly circling this drain of depression, but there's normal grief that causes depression. And some of that is grieving the fact that you can't do what you used to be able to do, or you don't feel well and stuff. And so if you know someone who is older, just realize that, they're likely having issues with depression.
Absolutely.
And that's just one of many mental health issues that oftentimes, comes with being older. I think another area that is really common for people is nutrition. They're not eating well. And one of the questions that I oftentimes ask when I'm in, a intake interview is, have you lost weight? Well, oftentimes as someone's getting older, if they're living by themselves, they don't feel like cooking. They may physically not be able to cook well. And so, not only will they have lost weight, but oftentimes they can be malnourished. Um, and, neighbors, friends, family members can help a lot in many ways. Obviously, you can have caregivers come in and make fresh meals for them.
Sure.
You can have, as family members can pre-cook meals that are actually homemade meals, and have it so that they just take it out and throw it in the microwave, and it's not Stouffer's or
Right.
one of the things, and not that Stouffer's is bad. They're, but I don't think anyone would recommend having it every single day.
Sure, exactly.
Or every single meal. That I don't think
Get
that
a little
is,
tiring. Yeah.
yeah, that at least from a variety standpoint probably isn't the best of things. But the loss of weight is big because usually it's not fat that people are always
Muscle.
losing. It's muscle, and that means weakness and other things. So there are a lot of things that family or friends can do for someone who's having that. Well, the other thing too is as we get older, we're not quite as limber as we used to be. So with the loss of the ability, or with weakness and balance issues that are so common, people will oftentimes injure themselves. And it doesn't take much. It's like, they'll do something and they'll, like, oh,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
their shoulders are out. And it's like, how did that happen? I just, it did something simple and that happened. But, not only that, but fall, can lead to a broken hip, and so many other things can lead to, impairments that happen, whether it be a temporary or a long term. Pain is another thing that's really common with older people. That you have kind of the aches and pains that can happen from arthritis and other chronic conditions. That you can have, gut pain because you're, constipated, or other things, which again is really, really common. Bowel issues become a big
Right.
issue, and so dealing with pain is common. So where you see people are taking their medicines, obviously if it's severe enough, you may have some really strong medicines, but it's not uncommon to see a high use of Tylenol and ibuprofen or other NSAIDs with people who are older. And that in itself can be problematic, because you can also, if you take too much, have kidney or
Right.
liver issues, depending on, which medicines that you're taking. So they're not harmless medicines. They have secondary effects that can be, a big issue. Obviously, one of the elephants in the room is, things like dementia or cognitive decline. Most people will have cognitive issues of some sort. And those cognitive issues aren't necessarily dementia. I mean, like full-blown dementia. But you're not going to think, as people get older, they're typically not going to think quite as quick. They have the same kind of
Sure.
speed. And I relate that to, if you have a computer that only has so much storage space as it gets older, and it's filled up. I mean, there's a lot of information in there, and it just slows down the whole process. And I think that's what a lot of people experience, is that slowing down. They think fine. They don't have any issues with that. It's just, it's not as quick.
Quick as it used to be. Yep.
Yeah, it takes longer for it to, for you to come up with that thing. and there's those normal struggles of like, what's that word?
Yeah.
And that happens oftentimes pretty young, and that's an early thing where people are like,
Or where's my
what's
keys?
that word? Right, exactly. Yeah. So, but then there's the bigger things, the real dementia. And we've talked about dementia in the past, but you have things like vascular dementia and Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia, other things like that are really big and are something that have pretty profound long-term effects. It's interesting. I don't know if I've said this to you before, but most of the people that are is it centenarians, so they've made it to 100, their minds are usually sharp as can be. They rarely, at least my experience, do I see a lot of dementia.
Right.
You have a little bit of that slowness a bit, but it's like it's not the major thing that that they're dealing with. Typically what they're dealing with is their body just isn't working very well anymore, and so
that was interesting because that's how my mother was. Okay. My mother always repeated herself. So even in her 30s and 40s, that was her way of speech. So you couldn't have said when she was 90, that it was dementia. But I think that was the hardest part when she had her stroke, because she went from the first day still speaking properly, understanding everything, but each day you started to see a decline. And usually you have weeks, months, even years sometimes to see that type of decline. And I think that's why so many people don't even realize that they are declining.
Right. Yeah. And there's also a lot of denial, because no one wants, that to happen. So, so frequently, it's like, oh, I'm, if I pretend like it's not there. So they don't talk, that again, this can lead to some of that depression and other things I talked about. They don't want to talk about it with their family, because if they admit that something's going on, that could cause a whole other bunch of things in their mind that might happen. Like I might be put in a home, or I might be whatever. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but my mom had like really good coping mechanisms as she had the dementia was going. My sister would call from out of town, and my mom would write down like what they talked about. My sister was wonderful, and she called my mom frequently, but my mom would write it down and she would refer back to that when she was talking to my sister, so as to kind of not give any indications that she had this cognitive decline. So my sister, I think, was very surprised at how far along my mom was. And especially because I think my mom was great at showtime. She could turn it on. So it was actually kind of funny, because when she would go into her doctor's office, it was like, wait a second, this isn't the same person. And she would kind of snow the doctor with the way she answered things and, her responses or other things, because she would kind of kick in, and I'm sure there was some adrenaline and other things, but that wasn't sort of her norm. That was like when she would
she was on stage.
When she was on stage. So the other kind of giant thing that it looms large in many people's lives is the whole thing of like eyesight loss, hearing loss, loss of taste, other things. So the impairments that happen with those senses can be pretty profound. And one of the most like isolating things, and maybe you can share about it if you want, but like hearing loss is a really big thing, because it isolates that person, and a lot of people are refused to get hearing aids. Yeah, and I think that that, and a lot of that's denial. Some of it's because it's a pain in the neck because of what you have to do with hearing aids. But it really isolates people, and I really think it makes people's dementia much, much worse because of that isolation.
And the one thing I can say is when I lost my hearing, I was in my late 50s, and automatically, it was like, if I really share this with too many people, they're not going to see me in my late 50s. They're going to see me like I'm 80 or 90, because, we expect people to lose their hearing. And I remember talking to my ear surgeon about it. And he said, Karen, can I tell you how many babies are born without hearing? Can I tell you how many young children lose their hearing from a virus or whatever? And he started giving me all this data. And it was like, well, okay, but that's from an illness. He said, but what do you think yours was? You had a tumor. We had to take it out. Guess what? We knew you weren't going to have, perfect hearing in that ear. We had hoped you'd have some, but we didn't know. And once I started looking at the facts, I too, right away, it was, when can I get hearing aids? I wanted them as quickly as possible. I'm told by my audiologist, and I've had 3 in the last 10 years, they seem to retire when they're taking care of me. I don't know what's going on, but I wear mine almost 24/7 because I want to hear what's going on around me. And
hopefully they aren't retiring because of all you spent. So
well, that's true too. Although I have to say, hearing aids are finally starting to come down in price. They're getting a little more reasonable. My first set was $10,000.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's like, where do you come up with $10,000? But the thing that I learned right from the beginning and wearing them was, my mother-in-law had hearing aids. She didn't like them. They sat in her drawer. And so she missed out on a lot of life. And one of the things I decided was, I'm not going to miss out. And when my hearing aids aren't working properly, I go back. And it's not a luxury. It's a need. And I hope everybody, who has any hearing loss, does something about it, because you are right. You are isolated. People around you get annoyed. I mean, my husband to this day is like, why do I have to repeat myself? And it's like, when my batteries are going low, you have to repeat yourself. My batteries don't tell me they're low until they're gone.
Right.
So sometimes I can figure it out if I keep asking him, what did you say? But a lot of times I can't. And so it's an education for all of us to understand.
Well, and in a way that says how well your hearing aids do work, if when they're working, that you're hearing them fine. But again, the frustration of it, and you're right. The key thing is, do something about it if you can.
Right.
If you have the ability to get a hearing aid, and you can be aggressive in making sure that it's working well, it's important to do it, because and be sensitive as well, because if the person is not able to hear well, you have to have the patience, under those circumstances, or you need to do things to help compensate. Also realize that, if someone goes to a crowded place, where there's a lot of people talking, and I don't know if this is your experience, but I know in a lot of people's experience, even if you have a hearing aid, it picks up all sorts of things, and it's hard to hear because you have all this competing. And if you don't have your hearing aid, it's also terrible
Right.
because you have all
Exactly.
these competing things. So
Exactly.
it makes it almost impossible to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right. There are some situations where it can be very difficult. But again, if you find the right, audiologist, you work with the right people, and like with anything else, you have to do some research, or the people around you have to do that research. You were talking about, arthritis pain, and there are some people, who take a lot of medication, and there are other people, who go to the pool and go swimming or do exercises, and it's what works for you. And sometimes you have to be your own detective.
Right. Well, another one is, is not only hearing, but our other senses. So if you have lost your sense of taste, I was the unfortunate ones, and there's been pretty much all of America now, it seems. I had COVID, but I had COVID before the vaccine first came out. And so it was that initial wave.
Yeah.
Which means that I got the one that strongly had associated with the loss of taste. So, I ended up losing my sense of taste and smell. And, it's come back, but with losing it, I couldn't believe what you lose with that. And that's
Absolutely.
really common with it gave me a very different appreciation to older people and what they're dealing with. When they say that things don't taste good and they've lost their sense of taste or other things. And so, it was, one of those things where, having experienced that, I could understand why people don't feel like eating, and why they have some of the issues that they do, and don't take the pleasure that you can get from things like having a good meal or other things.
Sure.
It also explains why someone might like something very sweet or very strong in flavor, because of the fact that that's what they can taste, maybe. Eyesight, we have cared for a number of people that have really bad eyesight, and and ironically, many of them were ones that love to read. Just know that there are alternatives, fortunately, of books on
Sure.
tape and stuff. But that's what they love, but it also provides fall hazards and all sorts of other things that happen, because of that. We've talked before on one of our broadcasts, which I recommend people watch, about incontinence and, incontinence issues. But, issues around the bladder are actually a pretty big deal. It's one of the leading reasons that people get hospitalized when you're older, is having urinary tract infections. But even beside that, having incontinence of bowel and bladder can limit someone's life really significantly. And, it's difficult, it's embarrassing, for the folks that have it. And, fortunately, there are solutions around it that people can do and use. But, you just have to acknowledge, first of all, that it is an issue. And I think family members need to be sensitive that obviously, they can't control, but the fact that this is going on, and that, having proper, equipment, I mean, like things like the bladder control block
Sure.
products, and or even some medicines can make a big difference in some people's lives. So, there are other things that also are out there. I recently ran into someone that was older and had some cognitive issues. And unfortunately, I also believe that person had some issues with substance abuse. And, all that's going to do is make things much, much worse for that individual. We see a lot of people that have had cognitive decline because of substance abuse over the years. Sometimes that's alcohol, which is really common, where that can trigger in some people, dementia issues. But, also things like marijuana use, they can really aggravate someone who has underlying dementia issues. The last thing you want to do is add marijuana to the mix,
Right.
And so, understand that that substance abuse issues are pretty common as people get older. One of the big things I've seen, this is was kind of fascinating. As you get older, your kidney, your liver doesn't process the way it did when you're younger. So medicines tend to stick in the system a lot longer than they did, and cycle around. And so you see someone that maybe when they were younger, they were that generation, they could drink, strong alcohol, but now, one drink can really,
Absolutely
make them
push them over. Yep.
Yeah, push them over the edge. And by going to what was your normal before, you're not only, like in the past, you might be, just a little bit buzzed for those people but now you're hammered. I mean, you're like, you're just plastered. And that's because your body can't really clear the alcohol in the same way that it did before.
Well, and I think it's interesting that sometimes our doctors, will find a medication that they say, this really, really works. Okay. In fact, I was on one. I'm slowly being weaned off of it. But when I was put on it last year, within the first 30 days, I blew up 20 pounds. And I remember calling the doctor and saying, there's something wrong. I said, when I'm podcasting and I look in, the camera and my face is twice the size it's been, I said, that scares me. And he said, oh, no, it's the medication. Don't worry about it, And I did my research to find out he was right. And the medication was working for what it was supposed to be. But I also had to start taking note of things that made my symptoms worse. And one of those at the time was coffee. The caffeine in the coffee would blow me up more. So within a month, I put on 20 pounds. The following month, I had an extra 10 pounds. And it was like, I haven't changed my eating habits. I eat very green and natural. I was exercising, but I look like, I felt like Humpty Dumpty. And,
right, yeah.
Again, sometimes you don't know that it's happening to you, but if the people around you see that things change that drastically, it's time to do some research.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm glad I stayed on the medication because what we were treating is basically gone. And I've been able to wean off and the weight is coming off and all that. But it was very depressing, and I can't imagine somebody who doesn't understand that, what they're going through.
Yeah, it's also strange because you may eat healthy, and if you're taking meds, it can be a problem. For example, one of those hidden things is grapefruit interferes with being able to clear certain drugs. So there are some drugs where you should not have grapefruit with it,
Right.
because basically they're competing for the same site to kind of get out of your system. And you know, I think you make a really good point, and you know, want to wrap up with a couple thoughts. One is that do stuff about it. You know, that all the things I mentioned, oftentimes there are solutions around that. Sometimes the solutions are, you know, taking meds. Sometimes it's changing lifestyle. Sometimes it is getting help. And sometimes it is giving help to someone you see, you know, has those needs. The other thing that, you know, and I'm not just trying to, you know, push our services, but strategically using an aid for a loved one or for a person themselves can be a really good thing. Because
Absolutely.
what you are saying is there are problems here. How can we help to compensate for those issues or those problems? So by placing an aid in there, maybe they can help, you know, the aid can help with nutrition, you know, that we talked about. Maybe they can help with exercise, because, you know, doing some gentle exercise like walking can help with some of the issues of aging. You know, taking some of the burden off of someone by doing some of the things that are very difficult for that person might prevent injuries. Just from a social standpoint, you know, having someone come in, they have that human interaction that everyone aches for, you know,
Absolutely.
and you know, with that loneliness that happens by outliving friends and family and others, you know, an aid can really help to bridge some of that grief gap, you know, by being able to you know, be a friend and to interact and to you know, have that social thing that we as humans desire in a deep way. So you know, just some thoughts on both the chronic conditions or many of the issues that can happen as people age, and just to realize that when you see someone that is older, think about what they may be going through, and explore and help where you can in that other person's life. So with that, that's my thoughts.
Well, I love those thoughts. And, you know, we need to bring back a little more kindness in our world. And I'll tell you, the other day, somebody held the door open for me. And my first reaction was, oh, do I look that old? And I said, thank you. And I turned around and looked at the person. And I think they were older than me. So I think I made their day by letting them hold the door and by me saying thank you. But whatever we can do to help each other out, let's do it. And let's make the world a little bit better.
You know, it's funny. I'll just mention one last thing. I hold the door open for, like, I don't care if it's a man, a woman, you know, someone older, someone younger. You know, that's what I do. I just hold the door open because, you know, that to me is an act of kindness.
Absolutely.
And just says to that person, you matter, you know, that I would, you know, and it's not because of frailty or anything. It's just that person matters, you know.
I appreciate that. Well, everybody have a great day and hold the door open for the next person.
Sounds like good advice. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.